Good.
So, recording. And now I have to say, I think that, does anybody wish to not be recorded? Do they wish to hide their face or put up a blank screen? Or if you do, reception. Ah, right. Okay. Now, this is a discussion on, I suppose, challenges of future pandemics, but I'm thinking of it as son of challenges. And there's a list of 10 that you've all seen, and this is number 2. Number 2 is environment human interface challenge. And if we stick with a list of 10 that we've got as here, and I know that's up for discussion, then obviously there's going to be a little bit of overlap at the boundaries between number 2, environment human interface, and number 1, environment, and number 3, emergence. So it's possible that some items might end up in both, or it's also possible that we might have to have some discussion on which is the appropriate home for some of these items. Now, those of you who were involved in the Isaac Newton challenges section might remember that the typical structure would be that there would be, say, usually about 8 challenges on in one of the papers. So the paper would be called sort of 8 challenges in modeling XYZ, and they will be put together, a couple of paragraphs on each, outlining very briefly what the current situation was in that area, and then what the current difficulties were with a few key references. And then there would be an introduction and a discussion just to tie everything together at the end. So to give this some potential structure, I made a list of 10 topics, and I'm just about to go into chat, put to everyone, type message here. Right, that's a good start. And there is the list. Did that go? Let's see, type, get to the end, press return. Ah, there it is.
Yep.
So, right, that's the list that I made off the top of my head in a couple of minutes. So it's not set in concrete, but I thought at least we'd have something to talk about if I put something up. So I'm happy to change it, move it around, whatever. And what I would like to get at the end of this session is more or less a volunteer to steer or coordinate writing a few paragraphs on each of these topics. So is everyone happy with that way to go, or got alternative suggestions? No, okay. So I think there's a sort of logical order there. We're talking about challenges in the environmental human interface, and it says, e.g., challenges in wildlife human interaction. So I was thinking about things that might change a wildlife human interaction, and I would anticipate that climate change would turn up on virtually every challenge, almost, of all the 10 different challenges. But something ought to be said about wildlife human interaction and climate change. So does anyone want to comment on that or pressing issues in related to climate change and how it affects wildlife-human interaction? Nobody wants to comment on it. Okay. Does anyone want to put their hand up and say they could write something about it? Ah, this is going to be a lively discussion, isn't it? Right. Okay. Well, let's park that for a second then. And how about land use change, which is the second one that I put down? I'm thinking there that changing land use, deforestation, urbanization, etc., is going to change the interaction between wildlife and humans, at least on the margins. Quite a bit's been written about that already. Any comments about that?
I don't know if you can you see the comments that Andy Dobson has just.
Andy has just put something. Yes.
Yes.
I'm happy to do some stuff on that. Andy, is that relating to the first one, climate change or land use change? Land use change. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello. Someone else commenting.
Yes, hello, that's me. Well, I would be happy to work on this topic as well, if there's still interest. And to me, actually, from my perspective, this would work a little bit together with moving house and sort of contact opportunities. So land use change that comes with a sort of novel interaction, let's say at the maybe domestic animal-wildlife interface or human domestic animal-wildlife interface.
Yep. Okay, that's good, thank you. And Andy has just put up that he could do something on climate change as well if no one else volunteers. So thank you, Andy.
Yeah.
Right. Number 3, I was thinking of, when I put moving hosts and vectors, I was thinking about more traveling. We are, for example, where I live, we're free of things like dengue, but again, it's related to climate change a bit, but the climate is changing in a way that the Aedes mosquitoes could establish if they get here, and sometimes they do turn up and they're trapped and eliminated. So you've got a case there of vectors moving around. You've got potential for host animals moving around as well. So I was thinking there of that sort of transport. Does anyone have any comments about things that could be included there, or?
So also within moving hosts, but with a different perspective. So I'm part of a consortium working on bat-borne zoonotic viruses on bat ecology. So including work in Australia and Africa and other countries. So we have a good case studies also for how host movement, in this case bats in particular, is being affected by the other factors like land use change, etc. But as far as the modeling is concerned, could have good case study for moving hosts which are non-vector-borne diseases.
Right. Yep, that would be quite relevant. Is David Heyman involved in that?
No, not directly in this consortium, which is more where we've been focusing on Hendra and Nipah. But he's worked with us before on the African fruit bat for his PhD.
Right. Yeah, I knew that you published stuff with him.
Yes, and obviously he would also be great to be involved in that if he can spare the time. I know he's very busy.
He's very busy at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else got some comments on that? Okay.
The problem I have, Mick, is that you've given us 10 rather abstract categories here, and I had made a few notes of possible challenge things, and I'm sort of see myself as being in a different dimension here. So I almost wonder whether a helpful thing would be to, if people had sort of bullet point challenge topics that sort of didn't quite mesh with your, or it wasn't quite obvious how they meshed with your abstract categories, if we put those forward and then wondered whether they, I look at the ones I've got and I wonder whether they even belong in this paper as opposed to 1 or 3. And I also wonder which of your headings they might come under.
Well, as I said at the start, after all, this is just off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And I'm quite happy to consider other structures.
Your structure might well be a good one. It's just a question of
well, please put up your additions or alternatives, and yeah, I think I'm totally happy for us to discuss those as well.
Well, personally, I can see the logic in Mick's list too, because that's a lot of topics that belong to this environment-human interface of infectious diseases and some of the drivers of change. But I guess that there will be, within each of these topics, that we may find kind of emerging challenges. On some of these challenges may be common to multiple topics in relation to availability of data. I guess typically will be one of the common challenges. So I wonder whether when we start populating your bullet points, we may then want to restructure the paper in a slightly different way. If it's if the paper has to be changed about challenges for modeling the environment-human interface for future pandemics.
Yeah, I think, can I add something? So I fully agree with Dennis in the sense that, for example, when I read environment-human interface, I understood something else, because from what I come, for me, the interaction with the environment was about how infection actually happens in different environments. So if you are, for example, in the public transport, or you are in an indoor setting or in an outdoor setting, how the humans interact with their environment, touching surfaces, breathing air, and how a particular pathogen is transmitted through different routes, depending on the environment. So for me, it was something else, which might not fit, obviously, in this paper. It might fit in one of the other 10 categories, or maybe not even that. But for me, there is a challenge, for example, because there are modeling approaches for trying to understand how transmission happens physically, and how to link that with epidemic modeling approaches. Because that is not really modeled. When we model epidemics, that is like a black box. You have a transmission rate beta, and you don't specify how that transmission is happening in different environments. So when I read environment and human interface, I understood something different. That was my case.
Yeah. I was trying to see what one might get out of Mark Woolhouse's talk, for instance, that where the question of how the viruses evolve And I mean, this, if you've got headings stuttering transmission and virus mutation and antibiotic resistance. Well, not quite antibiotic resistance, but that there's a sort of, you know, what's going on cuts across that you have viruses that can, first thing is to obviously to get into the humans, but then they, how do they evolve to get their R naught greater than 1, and then there's and then there's sort of question of surveillance, like how do you pick up on that? I mean, I think that the whole question of handling pandemics, I mean, the question of surveillance and you know, triggers that will actually cause humans to get alarmed and take action is a very big component in practice. You know, we can see in some of the responses in the current pandemic were very prompt, like sequencing the new virus, for instance, was something that happened fantastically fast in a way that simply couldn't have happened 5 or 10 years ago. Other ones, like recognizing it was dangerous, recognizing that it was different, that it was an unknown. I mean, people treated it as a known unknown, you know, it's going to be like these other things we've had, and then it turned out not to be. And some of the aspects of the response were inappropriate and slow to change. I mean, the whole thing about transmission being picked up on surfaces or airborne. So I think the whole thing is so multidimensional. It may well be that the kind of headings you're giving here are a good way of bringing order to it, but equally, it's quite easy, I think, to think of a challenge and then think, goodness, I really don't know which heading that one comes under.
Well, some of what you just said, I would have thought belonged in number 1, environment.
Yeah, well, that absolutely, and I think
the evolution of the virus or something like that until it.
Or number 3.
Or number 3.
I think subjects. I mean, the original listing, I have to confess, it says, you know, 1, 2, and 3 is my distinction. Almost it picked up from other people, but and in doing it, I was aware that 1, 2, and 3 is like a sort of progression, and there may well be challenges that cut across. So I think at the moment we shouldn't be afraid of coming up with challenges which belong in 1 or 3. I think it's only perhaps when someone writes a paragraph or 2 about them, or in other way, or we do in discussion, we make them rather more precise. You know, so in other words, I think the first target for me would be to get a whole lot of bullet points that belong in 1, 2, or 3, and not worry too much about whether they belong in 1, 2, or 3, or indeed which heading they belong to, and hope that some structure will emerge when we do that.
Well,
I was actually wondering, I mean, we talk about sort of drivers, land use change, climate change, and we have the different sort of dimensions, so emergence of another pathogen and then sort of the epidemic spread. So the different processes, like the emergence, the spillover of a virus, and then the epidemic spread can be, well, determined by different drivers. So maybe this would be good to restructure these things. So what should be in one particular paper in terms of spillover, epidemic spread, and then sort of what are relevant drivers like climate change, land use change, or moving hosts?
I think that's back to Dennis, really, because that relates.
Now this is linked because I had this impression we talk about these different things, right? So antibiotic resistance would be even difficult now to fit in this sort of discussion.
It would in a way, yeah. Yeah, as I said, these are bullet points, and it was off the top of my head in about 10 minutes. So it's quite okay that they could be deleted or moved around or moved into another discussion.
Yeah, but I think that, no, I'm not, well, I'm certainly not asking you to do that, Mick. I'm thinking, I think we want to, as I say, want to come up with some, I say more focus. So that's probably not the right word. Some really more precise challenges, you know, that might come within one of these headings. So, and I suppose the way of saying, for discussion, we shouldn't worry if we and try and refine what that challenge is and why it's something that particularly modelers might be able to do something about or look at, and only worry after that as to whether actually where we originally thought of placing it is the right place for it, or whether it should perhaps be moved. I think that would be, you know, I mean, all brainstorming needs a positive attitude. When people suggest silly challenges, you absolutely should not say that's a silly challenge. You should just write it down and move on to the next. And then when later you come back and look at them, you know, so the idea is to maximize the number of ideas. And if you start telling people, if you start trying to cut off an idea when it's suggested, that's going backwards. So we certainly don't want to do that at this stage. That's a stage for that is a pruning or editing stage later on.
Okay.
So I have one thing here. Like when I see the list here, I don't think well, I do think that I have to read in a lot to even formulate what the challenges within this topic are. And I think that holds for more of us. So perhaps I am not the person to contribute much here, but in some instances I might say, okay, this is something I have heard Jamie Lloyd Smith talk about. Shouldn't we contact him to formulate something, and or someone from his group to contribute to this as well?
Oh, well, yeah, there are other groups working in this sort of area, not just Jamie Lloyd Smith, but
no, but I know, but
there are a lot of people.
But I'm just saying is I'm not the person who to contribute much here. I was just hearing. I was not thinking of being here as being part of the writing of the paper, but more of a part of throwing in ideas. But I think it is a good idea as well if we, some of the challenges we see, that we try to reach out to other groups or to groups to ask whether they can formulate a challenge in this specific direction.
Yep. Happy with that, of course. Yeah. Right. Well, shall we continue moving down the list I've put up for now, and other people feel free to add to the list or modify the list or say that it's not relevant? Or do people want to just do something else?
I think that's a good idea. And I mean, one thing we can also do after the back of this, if everyone has got Slack and is able to use Slack, can I suggest that we could put that list that you've put up, Mick, and then we could put this on a Google Doc, and then people can edit it or put some extra challenges in the Slack channel, just as a way of starting to brainstorm ideas. I guess that's kind of what I think Dennis, maybe you and Valerie had seen as these discussion sessions to be like a brainstorming session from which we can try and hone in a bit more.
Yep, happy with that. I can use Slack. I presume, well, we've got Slack set up, so that's okay.
Sorry, can I ask, so is there a Slack channel already for this paper setup or not yet?
Yes, there's, yes and no. There's, I think on the IDP workshops discussion Slack, there's I think there's a thread called challenges, but we were thinking we might set up individual threads for each of the different challenge papers following this meeting, because setting one up, you need to know who to invite to it. So one of the things to do immediately after this session is to set up a thread in number 2, environment, whatever it is, interface, and make sure that everyone involved in this conversation, and probably some other people who've expressed interest who are not able to be with us this morning, are invited to that. We might just set it up so that all the IDP participants are on Slack and can access the threads, but not sure. But yes, so that's a technicality.
Okay. Well, so far we've covered the first 3 on, well, mentioned the first 3 on the list, with, and then just a bit of jumping around. And I'd be happy if people talked about things they're interested in on the list, and also things that came under the different headings or alternative headings. And it might be easier, you know, if some of that, well, some of that obviously will emerge from a Slack discussion rather than off the top of our heads on a Zoom discussion. So if I move on just thinking about the way I was thinking about it, the 4th one I've got down is moving humans. And I was thinking there about, because we're talking about the environment-human interface, then I was thinking about the humans moving into the environment rather than the environment. You know, the first 3 are more like the environment coming to the human. And so the 4th one, I was thinking about the humans moving into the environment. There are obviously things such as, well, one example I could think of is Lyme disease, where the pathogen is more in the forest, and the human is getting it from, like when we were in Finland a couple of years ago, we were told, be careful going to the forest because you're liable to get Lyme disease in this area. So not that Lyme disease might be a future pandemic, but there could be other things out there that we might want to know about. So does anyone have any comments in that sort of area? And feel free to say if you think it's totally irrelevant, and we should put a line through it as well.
Definitely relevant.
It's relevant.
Very short. I mean, it comes to me again a little bit with almost maybe different landscapes, right? And just one comment, maybe we can also think about different scales of movement. So you have sort of fine scale movement, like moving in a park, maybe approaching wildlife or having contact with wildlife, and we have sort of globalization effects. And we also can think about sort of macroecological perspectives. So macroecological perspective, globalization comes also with novel opportunities of disease spread.
Sure.
And of course also international human travel, right? So sort of spread of diseases at international scale.
So if there's an interaction in one part of the world, then people would take that pathogen to other parts of the world, as has happened with COVID-19.
Yes, so it's even like a link of maybe local and international movement in some ways. I mean, this all is relevant and interesting to discuss what's the challenge in this sort of fields.
Correct. Any other comments there? No. And then the fifth one I put down was ecological tipping points. And I see there's a couple of papers in Interface just the other day on tipping points, ecological tipping points, actually. So there's quite a bit of work going on in that sort of area. I should think that there's, oh, it's not mine. I should think there's still quite a few problems to work out in that area. Is anybody a sort of expert on that sort of thing?
So is this tipping points in the virus or tipping points in the?
Thinking more about the dynamics, tipping points and the dynamics, or how you decipher the tipping points and the dynamics.
Yeah, no, I think this is very, yeah, absolutely crucial, isn't it? Because in I mean, you know, how come that a virus, you know, there's a virus in bats, and it is the kind of virus that if humans get it, they can pass it on, but not sufficiently to to cause an epidemic. And how does it? So presumably then requires a change to a mutation to allow it to get to R naught greater than 1. Now, is that just a process which is going along at some very low rate, you know, per human animal contact? But if you get huge number of, you know, by the time you've had 100,000 human animal contacts, it's almost bound to happen. Or is there more going on than that? So
that's more or less, I would have thought, more like the stuttering transmission in humans.
Well, yeah, I suppose I'm thinking that the two are.
Well, everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I wouldn't take a fixed view as to which heading to put a suggestion like that under. I would more ask, you know, is that a sensible way of looking at it? If we're trying to model what's going on and say.
So maybe to expand on that a bit. So I've been working with as I said, with that team, with Rena Plowright on the Jamie Lloyd Smith in particular. And they, you know, a few years ago, they developed that kind of deconstruction of the spillover chain, with, you know, trying to have those multiple layers of all the steps that are needed to allow spillover, and you can then go from this kind of descriptive, qualitative model into a more quantitative one. And so one of Rena's postdocs started as just a kind of theoretical exercise, translating all those layers into probabilities. And then you can, when you get enough data for a particular system, a particular interface between wildlife and humans, to assess the distributions and also the spatial and temporal factors that affect these distributions, you can then assess where are the bottlenecks or the pinching points that you say which factor is more likely to enable the start of a spillover, and on which factor can you act more easily. Those kind of what did they call that? a lever action where you can easily act on one particular step of the spillover process to reduce the probability of the spillover. So it's going beyond that simple view of the bats on the human being, but looking at all the factors in between that make the probability of exposure high enough for the spillover to occur and for transmission to occur then.
Okay.
So it seems to me that, I hope I got this right, Olivier, that the modeling spillover is quite complicated and is going to cut across several of these headings. So it seems to me that the positive way forward is to say that there must be challenges, whether we end up calling them one challenge or several different challenges to do with spillover. And what would be very nice is if someone, and I mean, since it sounds very much as though you know more about this than I do, so if you would like to maybe expand on the challenges in spillover and try to relate them to mixed headings, insofar as that is sensible, that would be a good step.
Yeah,
yes.
the latest interface has a paper called Transient Indicators of Tipping Points in Infectious Diseases. And that's by Oregano Day, Rahani and Drake.
Okay. I haven't seen
So
that.
they've been working on that for some time, that sort of thing. And it also has a paper called Detecting and Distinguishing Tipping Points Using Spectral Early Warning Signals by Berry, Bouch and Anand. So yeah, I can put links to those papers on the Slack channel.
That'll be good.
So can do that. And yeah, they're very different approaches. And clearly there's a lot of work to be done still. Sorry?
Sorry, I was going to say, I think usually I'm familiar with some of John Drake's work. They tend to be very, very data-driven, as opposed to starting from the mechanisms.
This one is more mechanical. He's essentially got an SIR model, and he's using some of the reactivity stuff that Norbert and Caswell did a while ago to the idea that you might have a stable system, so the Jacobians icon values are all negative or negative real part, but you can still get some positive growth temporarily before everything goes down again. And that depends on the eigenvalues of the Hermitian part of the matrix. So, and they're expanding on that a bit. So even maybe, you know, if we're talking about contacting other groups to be part of this, we could look at contacting them and say, we're writing this. Would you like to be involved? And Dennis was talking about the stuttering transmission in humans when a virus or a pathogen gets into humans, and initially R0's less than 1 and things die out very quickly, and then gradually things mutate, and therefore the R value goes up until you do get transmission. And that appears to be the case, say, with avian influenza largely at the moment. So there are clearly challenges in that sort of area and in modeling that sort of system. Is anyone an expert in that sort of thing? I think Nim wrote some stuff on that, didn't he?
Yeah.
And Nim's not here. Okay. Right, the ecology livestock interactions. What I was thinking about there was you could have pathogens in the environment, and they could transmit from, say, the wild animal, which I'm thinking of as the environment, I suppose, the wild animal into the livestock, and then cause a problem with humans. Tuberculosis would be, say, an obvious contender there. Again, not really a pandemic, but still where you have many wild animals, like brush-tailed possums, and then they will infect cattle, and then the cattle could be a danger to the humans. And there should be other examples there. Does anyone know of any other examples I could think? So maybe.
But I can add something on the some of the zoonotic viruses. I think on filoviruses, on the henipaviruses. So one of my PhD students wrote a review, I think 2 years ago, on the role of domestic animals in the spread of, in the emergence of philo on the henipaviruses. So you have a combination of situations like the Hendra virus, where it mainly goes from bats to horses, and the main issue is with the effect on horses themselves.
Right.
And in other cases is you have the domestic animal as the stepping stone.
Bats to pigs, I suppose, and influenza, yeah. And like that. Yeah.
And the Nipah was, there was one outbreak of Nipah in Malaysia, I think, that went into pigs, and even though it didn't cause much disease in those pigs, then killed a lot of people who were working or living in the farms.
Maybe, Olivier, it's interesting. I mean, you work a little bit on this sort of like viruses spilling over from bats to domestic animals and then to humans. I work a little bit on the perspective sort of host sharing patterns, well, also macroecological patterns. So maybe, I don't know if this is relevant, maybe this can be added, because at least we have the evidence that lots of domestic species share lots of parasites, virus and other pathogens, parasites with domestic animals and then with humans. So because for lots of systems, we don't maybe really understand the details, right? So the ecological process that drive the spillover from wildlife to domestic animals and then to humans. So just a different perspective to maybe comment on him.
Yeah. And there are other interesting studies from different perspectives on the interface between livestock and wildlife in a number of African countries or South American countries, where you have kind of free, open range agriculture that that enables the direct contact between livestock and wildlife. And there have been studies about the kind of dilution effect that you have if you treat livestock with anti-helminth or other drugs that may reduce the burden of infection in livestock as well. So you have these different aspects, different issues related to this interface between livestock and wildlife, not just one way, the wildlife, livestock, humans, but also the effect that management of livestock by humans have on the management of on disease itself.
And again, the macroecological perspective or the species diversity perspective, house sharing perspectives come in here. So Serge Moreau just published a paper, I think, in Biological Conservation, where he looked sort of different livestock densities, different countries, and then I think it was parasite diversity and sort of the sharing and emergence of zoonotic diseases.
Which paper was that?
It was from Serge Moreau, I think, in Biological Conservation, published this year.
Okay, I have to look that one up.
Hang on, I can maybe I can find it.
Yeah.
Well, it is actually in Biological Conservation. If you're interested, I might quickly copy this.
Yes. Okay. And Olivier, you mentioned the dilution effect there. That's right. Yep. That's something that there've been a few publications on lately as well. And
Andy obviously knows a thing or two about this this topic of dilution effect. That is.
I didn't put that down as a separate heading because, although it could well be a heading here, and of course, you know, Lyme disease is the poster child for the dilution effect. The last three things I put on my list are sort of more generic things. Virus mutation, after all, that comes under other headings anyway. But might want to say something separately about it. We mentioned antibiotic resistance before. There are issues where I suppose it could come under the livestock interaction where treating livestock can mean that the livestock then end up with antibiotic resistant pathogens that can then infect humans. And when I put down novel pathogens, I was thinking about, you know, well, okay, something that's not on the list. But of course, years ago, we had things like mad cow disease and things like scrapie and the possibility of Creutzfeldt-Jakob and etc. So there are other things that maybe you might want to add to the list. So does anyone want to say anything about those sort of items, or whether they should be moved or incorporated or expanded on, or?
Well, the novel pathogen thing, there's obviously all the controversy about, you know, how much effort should be put into discovering and mapping all wildlife viruses, that global virome project, on how useful or cost effective it would be for pandemic prevention or prediction. So I don't know whether that's a relevant challenge for a more kind of modeling focused paper, but there's obviously a lot of discussion and on controversy at the moment on this.
Well, as Dennis said, just put everything in and then cut it out later if you don't think it fits.
Yeah, and I think myself, it would be an important part of the discussion of a challenges paper, or maybe the introduction, to point to important practical challenges that are not really within the scope of modelers.
Yeah.
Or ones which are dealt with in a different context. I'm thinking of anything to do with things to do with politics and decision make. Maybe things to do with politics and human decision making might go better in the challenges paper 10, which or whatever, which is to do
Politics
with
and policy, yeah.
Politics and policy. So I think in other words, better to list them for the moment, and they might end up with just something that's discussed and happens elsewhere. Or yeah.
Just to add a thought, I was thinking data sharing is a true challenge as well. So disease surveillance and making data really accessible for modeling.
Yeah, I think. I mean, one of my points I had down was developing critical data collection and analysis, especially on transmission, but on all these things. So I think a data-focused. I think we've got a data-focused paper. So we're supposed to have a data-focused chapter. Again, we could put it down. We could put down provisionally here, but maybe it should only end up in this paper if it's very specifically to do with this part of the problem. It might end up in the data challenges paper.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and number 10, politics and policy as well. So
yeah.
And I suppose you could toss in interventions. Are there interventions at the interface rather than number 4 is interventions, challenges in modeling transmission?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think there are, again, it's, I think you can discuss intervention usefully at a whole lot of stages. You could have some kind of intervention in wildlife populations to make them less prone to the kind of virus that is most likely to spill over into humans, or that kind of level. You could have interventions, obviously. Dealing with the wildlife for food trade is a very obvious intervention to try and minimize spillover opportunities, and so on and so forth. And interventions are both pharmaceutical, well, once it gets into humans, pharmaceutical, non-pharmaceutical, like all the social distancing stuff. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
And again, there are political considerations too, as obviously as we see at the moment. How do you handle the politics of persuading people to follow non-pharmaceutical interventions? So it's a sort of interventions is a very cross-cutting theme, really.
Well, there are lots of cross-cutting themes.
Because we cannot talk about views on environmental change without talking about policy and politics and interventions. So it's, I assume that some of those other papers further down the line will end up focusing on those questions in the context of pandemics, whereas we will focus more on these interventions or policy ahead of pandemics.
Okay, so we're at the top of the cliff and further down it's the ambulance at the bottom. Yeah. So we need to put interventions in here somewhere in the context of preventing the spillover rather than managing a pandemic once it's come. Now there was talk earlier about what constitutes the environment, and whereas I'd assumed the environment was sort of the ecology, and we were talking about the interaction between, say, the ecology and wildlife and the human population. It came up that it could be the urban environment as well. And food trade just got mentioned, which could be regarded, of course, as part of the environment, but it's not what I was originally thinking of as environment, but of course it could be included there. And I suppose other things such as picking up from surfaces, lift buttons, other things could be included here as well. Is that a reasonable attitude?
Well, I guess what another potential division which we may want to use or not is looking at the environment and the ecology and the interface that allow the initial spillover event to occur, on the initial exposure of new or mutated pathogens into the human population, versus the environment that allows pandemics to spread from human to human, which I think is what, sorry, I can't remember who, I think is left now.
Who mentioned, yeah. Okay, so, yeah, if we're talking, so there's an environment that humans transmit into that other humans pick up from, and then there's the environment that the wild animals or the other species transmit into that humans pick up from, and it does say environment-human interface. So do we concentrate on transmission from other species to humans here? Was that your intention, Dennis?
What's the alternative?
Well, I suppose that the transmission from human to human via the environment could come.
Oh, sorry, I see that. I think, I think we're talking about the stage at which it gets into humans and then gets to having an R0 greater than 1, so that an epidemic can get. Now that inevitably, that certainly includes talking. So it includes talking about the sort of early stage of human of the disease in humans, like you've talked about the stuttering chains thing.
Yeah.
And I picked up on another topic, which was that that there's that when you say R0 greater than 1, that might not be universal. It could be, for instance, that the kind of people who come into contact with wildlife and get a new disease have some kind of level of immunity to it, just because they've been doing that kind of thing a lot, okay? So in those people, R0 might be less than 1. But if it then gets out into you or me, it might have R0 greater than 1 among us. You see what I mean? So
yeah, because we're not used to it.
So in other words, saying whether a disease has got to the level stage where it can cause a pandemic may not, there may be considerable difficulties in spotting it. Well, I'm sure there are lots of difficulties. So, so I suppose what that means that if you're talking about evolution and stuttering transmission, then cross-immunity from exposure to other diseases is a relevant factor to at least mention.
But sorry, wouldn't that all go into the third challenge, which is emergence?
Well, yes, maybe. Well, yes, you're probably right, Olivier. But I think we should. I think we should. We should be prepared. Yeah. Well, I think the principle should be that if we come up with a sensible challenge in our discussions, we should note it down, even if we put it in a box marked, post to channel 3, so challenge 3.
And it wouldn't be the total challenge. It would be one aspect of a challenge. And in the few paragraphs you get to write about each challenge, you can say, well, there's also this particular aspect, and then cross-reference to another paper.
Yeah.
The epidemics challenges papers has got quite a few of those things in it, where 8 challenges in ABC also has a few cross-references to 10 challenges in DEF.
Yeah.
So would you like, you had a different structure, you said, Dennis.
No, it's not so much I had a different structures. I was just trying to put down some ideas of things that were challenges, but it wasn't really structured.
I think when we did the original challenge papers, we started, many apologies for ducking in and out, and also my internet keeps stopping as well. So one thing and another, I've missed half the discussion. But when we did the original papers to start with, we just all went away, as I remember. It was almost like sort of one of these ghastly PSRC meetings where they get you all to write on post-it notes. But we just wrote down anything we could think of and then tried to sort of sort them. And it may be that the main thing at the moment is to try and get down the challenges and not worry too much about the headings, and then try and slot them into to mix structure and the structure of the papers at the end. But maybe you've already said that. So.
Well, not necessarily my structure, an emerging structure.
Well, a structure, but it could be your structure. But maybe it's more constraining to try and put the structure at the beginning. You know, if
I think I was
just thinks about what from their perspective they see as challenges, then we can try and sort of sort them out a bit. But I don't know.
Right.
Sorry.
Well, I only put the structure up because otherwise we could have sat here wondering what we're going to talk about. So.
Yeah, no, we need a start.
Right. Now, one thing that does occur to me is when I've been on Zoom meetings, what turns up in the chat doesn't always get recorded.
No, that's right. So I should say my internet cut out and I've actually lost all the chat that was discussed before. But if someone else has still got it, there's like 3 little buttons in the chat where you can click on and you can save the chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
no, I've lost mine several times.
Yes. It's very not. I didn't even realise Zoom did that. I just now learned that. I thought
really
when you came back in, you had everything that was previously discussed. So someone just says that I've started a Google Doc with just all of the challenges that Mick, you had written down just as a bullet point list, and I've kind of put underneath that sort of Andy, who'd said he'd lead on like climate change and sort of other people. and the relevant papers, which I was just writing when I lost my chat, so I haven't quite finished that. But I was going to suggest, in light of what sort of Dennis and Valerie said about trying to just get challenges down, if I put a link to the Google Doc and share it with you all on the Slack channel, then maybe just initially for the next sort of day or two, people could just add to that bullet point list and of anything that they think of that they think could be relevant or interesting, and then we can start to pull it into a structure. Dennis and Valerie, do you think that sounds, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, if you think that what you're coming up with is a specific point that falls within one of Mick's headings, then put it under Mick's heading. If you don't know where to fit it, put it at the end. And we'll,
yeah, I'll make another heading. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, I mean, think of it as a wall on which we're sticking post-its.
Yes, which you can actually do virtually using mural boards, but I thought we'd keep it simple with with a Google Doc.
Yeah.
So, and Andy put a thumbs up, so I think that means he's happy with that.
Yeah.
Andy, I think you're the only one that's not on the Slack channel so I will send you an invite. Or has Dennis dealt with that?
Well, I put an invitation to him, giving his name and email.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
I mean, you've come up as Dobber, but there we are. It was from the,
yes, it's there.
Okay.
Cool. I think you're there, Andy, but try and let me know, because I'm not a Slack expert.
Yeah.
And
I did put on Andy on the general Slack channel for the IDP discussion groups a while ago, so I thought he was there. So
I think he is. I think I just missed him, Valerie. I think Dennis. Okay. Yeah, sorry, he is on Slack. Sorry. And what was the last thing I was going to say? Oh, I was just going to say, because I know people have been mentioning names of people to sort of reach out to. So if people put any names on that list who they think would be useful to get involved, then we can reach out to them. You were saying Jane Bean Lloyd-Smith, and we have been contacting him and trying. Some people are very busy, and I think sometimes it might be easier to get people involved if there's, you know, a more concrete thing we're asking them to do for the really busy people. So please put down names, and we can try and cajole them and get them involved.
On the other hand, I mean, I think that would be really good, but I think we should avoid trying to get huge numbers of different research groups, because
good point. Yes,
these things sort of work best if it's a fairly small group of people who are actively discussing. So, you know, individuals rather than groups, I would suggest. Have we lost somebody again? Okay. Oh, Peter, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there was in the original challenges, there was challenges in modelling. I forget how it went, but something to do with wildlife infections. And Jamie Lloyd-Smith, I think, was one of the movers or lead authors on that. Okay, I clicked on save chat, but it's not apparent to me where it's saved to.
Yeah, it's very random. I can't remember where. I think each computer saves it to different places. But if I just went before onto like my Finder, and it like I think I found Zoom chat. But anyway, maybe people can just remember and add on anything to the Google Doc that they said that isn't on.
I've got it saved up to date. So if we're, I mean, the thing is, if a couple of us, I'll do it, and you could try too, Kiara. If we just try and remember when we finish to do a save chat at that point, whichever of us is successful can post it in the Slack channel or.
But presumably it will only save the chat that one can actually see. So it's in the sense that I've lost mine several times. So all I've got is the last two messages. Presumably that's all I get if I save it. I won't somehow miraculously get back to what I had before.
No.
I didn't think I would. It would be too clever, wouldn't it?
So I've got saved that you went to talk to the plumber.
Well, I've lost all that because.
Yeah, me too, Valerie. Yeah.
But you can wipe out all that. The plumber has now left, so you have my undivided attention. Hopefully, I have some heat.
Oh, the other thing I can do is Control A, Control C, and then paste it to another document. I suppose. Blank document.
Yeah, I did start to do that, but then I lost it all. So
Hashes.
Oh, no. When I pasted it, just said from me to everyone. That didn't work. Okay, do we need to discuss any more this evening?
Or even this morning.
Oh, even sorry. Yeah. It's dark here. Yeah.
It's sunny here. We've got sunshine, blue sky. It's quite wonderful.
Oh, it's sunny. I'm still wearing shorts sitting here. You can't
No,
see
we're
that.
not. No.
Okay. Well, I think Andy's leading off on number 1 tomorrow.
Oh yeah, this afternoon, which I guess is tomorrow for you.
It's 3 a.m.
Yeah.
So
Well, Andy set this wonderful example by turning up in the early hours. So
he had.
we won't hold you to it, Nick.
No, I think I'm going to bed. Anyway, 4 hours time, he says. Okay. So, do you think we should wrap up now, or does anyone need to add anything else? I know we don't have to go until 11 o'clock, do we? If we...
No. We just put that in for people to have time.
Okay, so thank you everyone for your contributions, and I look forward to seeing tons of stuff on the Slack channel, and then we can start trying to put stuff together.
Well, thank you very much. Sorry.
Thanks for leading the
We'll
discussion.
meet again in the near future, I should think.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for